Welcome to Reroute Reflections, where we share our thoughts and insights about relationships, wellness, and business. We're your hosts, Becca and Andrew. We've been married for 10 years and have plenty of knowledge and experience in our relationship, the wellness industry, and the business world. Grab a coffee and let's chat.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, welcome to episode 11.
Yep. Sorry about the little delay last week.
Yeah, we're back from our little mini break, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of weeks ago we talked about burnout, so
yeah,
it's important to take breaks.
And now we're on a real break in real life, so
yeah, exactly.
We're not working this week, which is nice.
Yeah, so I guess, if for our weekly recap, let's maybe do the last
Go right into it.
2 weeks, I guess. So I guess I'll start. Yeah, so we had a really busy weekend last week, and as you all know, we're a little bit behind on recording, which we hope to get back into a little bit of a groove, having a few more episodes pre-recorded ahead of time.
Which is kind of funny because, technically we're on vacation this week and we're like, let's catch up on the podcast. We're rearing to, get some other work done.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
I mean, it's a beautiful setting, though.
It is, yeah.
We're in this nice little cabin cottage in Cornwall, Ontario, which is beautiful. Yeah.
We're much more relaxed this week, so I feel like recording a couple of episodes ahead will actually be achievable.
Yeah, and it's not that much work.
No.
To do, and it's really just us kind of having a chat, so that's all right. Yeah, but last weekend, why we didn't record was we had a cousin's play date. Cousin's date?
Just a date.
That sounded like
play date
really,
sounds like we're 5.
Yeah, date sounded like we were from the
deep south.
We had a date with our cousins.
No. Our littlest cousin.
Yeah. So
19.
Wait, hold on. Let's back up. So Ness, we didn't date our cousin. We had I'll back up a lot. So when we were younger, it was always this thing in my house anyway, in my family, where me, my sister, and my cousins, we never got a chance to have a sleepover. We always begged our parents to have a sleepover. And I think we did it really rarely. I think in the entire time that we were kids, we might have done it one time.
Yeah.
Right? So now that we're all adults, sounds so stupid to
You're
say.
let's make it happen.
Yeah, now that we're adults, we're we're gonna do it now that we get to do whatever we want. We're gonna have McDonald's at night. No, I'm kidding. That would have been a great idea.
Yeah.
Some McFlurries after all of that. So we decided so we try to do this once a year. But this was the first year since I think we did it tried to do it kind of around COVID time, because we were not seeing each other for such a long period of time. So after that, we were let's do this once a year. Let's commit to doing this. Last year, my sister was sick, so wasn't able to show up. So she
got COVID last minute, so she couldn't come.
So this was the first year that all of us were able to do it. And this year was a little bit special because our cousin just turned 19.
Yeah, the youngest cousin.
Our youngest cousin.
Is finally drinking age.
Yeah, in Canada. So 19 is the drinking age. So we took him out for a night of, just drinking, My plan was to get him as drunk. No, I'm just kidding. No, my aunt, who's probably listening, would have killed me. So
no, yeah.
I would not have done that. But, of course, as any 19-year-old would do, he, of course, forgot his license. So.
Yeah. Because he doesn't carry a wallet. Their generation only carries their phone and they just pay with Apple Pay.
Yeah, that's right. They're the tapper generation.
Yeah, his wallet was in his winter coat and he's like, I forgot it. And we're like, oh my God, we're finally going to take you out drinking and you can't even drink now.
Yeah. Though, I mean, we ended up still having a great time. We couldn't go to the bar that we originally had planned because I was pretty sure that they would have carded us on entry. But we went to a bar that was just a lot less formal in that sense. Not as long as you didn't drink, you could still hang out and stuff and not need ID. So we did that, had a great night. We went to Function Bar in downtown Toronto. So if anyone is familiar with it, it's a great place. They have live music. And as you all know, I've started to play Fallout. And if anyone is at all familiar with Fallout, they have this incredible soundtrack on Fallout. It's which I thought was literally made for the game. But I found out later down the road that it was actually old music from like the 30s and the 40s.
Yeah, like real music. They haven't changed it. Yeah.
And the background around Fallout is like it takes place in kind of like, post atomic war world, but it's set in the 30s and the 40s, right?
Right.
And so the music is all from there. And so long story short, when we got to the function bar, who was playing but this like incredibly like old school like jazz band. And so it just
was cool.
Gave me such reminder of playing the game, which I did not bring with me this week.
I was about to say that too. You didn't bring it with you.
Yep.
And there might be some regrets a little bit.
But a little bit, honestly.
Our goal this week is to actually like read and just like hang out together, take Luna on some walks.
This is really a vacation for
relax.
Luna.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if anyone's thinking like, oh, but what about the cats? Like, well, don't worry. The cats are well taken care of. We got somebody house sitting for us while we're away.
Yeah.
They probably would have been fine alone, but they're getting a little bit older.
And
so
we love them just as much.
Yeah,
we want them to still have someone to like play with.
Yeah.
Get their wet food every day.
Yeah. What else did I do this week? Well, I updated my website.
Yeah.
So now that I've got some time, I've been also doing a lot of like meetups and stuff and just kind of catching up with people. And I've had this on my to-do list for a while, but somebody had asked for like a portfolio of work, and I was like, okay, well, you know what? I'll do it, but I'll also kind of, do it in addition to kind of doing some updates to the site. So then moving forward, I just kind of refer people to the site and it would have everything there. So yeah, I kind of posted a few updates to the site. Really like the way that it's coming. It's not finished quite yet, but some of the updates are already up. And yeah, so that was a lot of fun. I think 2 major updates. There was like a company brochure that I hadn't updated since like 2022, which now I have updated with some like real work examples, which I thought was really cool. I had a lot of fun putting this together. I'm not gonna lie.
Good. That's important.
And yeah, updated a few pieces just to make it a little bit more current, but also added a new case study. So I do have a section on the site where I kind of talk about work I've done that was just really interesting and didn't really necessarily go the way that I had potentially planned and stuff like that. So I had one already up around a performance management project that I had worked on, just like a new coaching framework that I had implemented. So that was already up there, but now just recently added a case study for the work that I did on an M&A, so merger and acquisition, and helping integrate the teams together on that. So it's a really, really interesting one. I've been literally working on it for like slowly over the last like 2 months. So I finally finished it. And yeah, it's out and available on the website. If you are a change management nerd like me, go to rerouteconsulting.com and you'll find all that stuff there.
Yeah. All your new updates.
Yeah, it was great. How about you?
So I wrote my exam on Friday.
Oh my God.
The Canadian Dietetic Registration Exam, which I've been studying for many months now. Kind of like a big build up after even all the education that I've gone through again, because it was all testable material for this exam. So a lot of potential stuff to cover. I found the exam okay. There's definitely a lot of like trickier, more difficult questions that had me second guessing a little bit, but I'm just going to try and remain positive and hope for the best.
Yeah.
And
it's natural, like that. I mean, you always kind of, even if you, especially at an exam like that where every answer seemed to be like, it was correct, Right.
It's just, it depends on like what time they're asking you the question, like whether you're trying to do like an initial assessment with someone or you're in the middle of planning already, or it's towards the end of like a program that you're doing. Like you have to figure like all those little things out. So you have to read the questions like very carefully to make sure you haven't missed anything. There's definitely some like knowledge-based questions too. I found it very heavy on diabetes, which I never had a diabetes rotation. I see it like here and there, but I don't work with a ton of diabetic patients. So that was a little bit tricky, but just you got to make sure you just study everything, and the little areas that you're not super confident, you got to focus on those too. So yeah, we'll see, but I'm off work now until the 27th.
Yep.
So yeah, we came up to the cottage here yesterday, which would have been Saturday. And yeah, we're going to go back home on the next weekend, and then I'll be back to work on Monday. But yeah, I'm excited for the break. It's definitely very much needed. I feel like I was definitely in a phase of burnout, and I need some time to just chill and relax.
Yeah. And this is kind of the best environment I think it's one of the best environments to do it. We're right by the lake. It's like very like log cabin feel. Like even the woods have like, what are these called? Like shiplap?
No, I think this is literally like log.
Or it's wood. It's wood.
Like literally the inside of a log cabin. Like the walls are made of like logs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which really is cool.
Neat. I really like it.
We have an outdoor hot tub, outdoor sauna. The weather's quite hot this week, but
yeah, it's pretty wild.
We'll probably use a hose to spray ourselves down and cool off.
Yeah. Luna's loving it. You know, so far it's like, what time is it now? It's like 3:00. She's already passed out because she's already had a pretty hectic morning and early afternoon. So I'm sure she'll get a second wind around 6. So we'll prepare for that. But I'm glad you're done. Honestly, I was feeling like really nervous the whole time for you.
Yeah. It's just very like high stakes, right? Like, I mean, worst case scenario, if you do fail it this time around, you can write again in November. But even the fact you have to wait till November, like it only sits twice a year. And I just don't know what would happen like work-wise as well. So I'm trying not to go to that part. I feel pretty okay about it. So we'll see.
And how does the exam like work? Is it just pass fail?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And it's always the same. It's like everyone wrote the same questions. Like it doesn't, like if you answer a question right or wrong, that doesn't determine what your next question is, right?
No.
Right, okay.
So people wrote it Thursday and Friday. It was the same questions for everybody, as far as I know. And in November, all the questions change, but it would be the same for like that cohort that's writing it.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's based off, they're attempting to assess your entry-level competency as a dietitian. So they're not necessarily worried about how many questions you're answering, like quote unquote right or wrong. Like you're not getting a grade. But they just need to understand if you can pass enough questions to be deemed like competent to practice.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah. It's a little weird because it's like none of the exams I've ever done have been like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's a really interesting concept. This idea of like a regulated industry, right?
Yeah.
That would require, this type of, passing a standard like set of core competencies, like an exam to like establish whether you are competent enough to do this role. Yeah. And subject for our conversation today, right? Because we're in very we're in very different fields, right? Obviously, healthcare, business, but this idea of like regulated professions do exist in business. I can't think of a lot of them. The only one that comes to mind is like a financial advisor role, right? Like financial planner.
Or like CPA. Are they regulated?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Accounting. Yeah, CPA for sure. The I guess
financial planner.
The financial planner role. Even like the CFA, like an actual like portfolio manager to be able to like manage portfolios. I'm not sure if they actually require like the CFA designated chartered financial analyst like designation, or it's just something that is kind of a best practice and employer based.
Yeah.
I would bet that it's not actually, but I'm not sure 100%. But anyway, the idea is that, in business, there's not that many that are like regulated. Anyone, for example, can call themselves a change manager.
True. Yeah.
Anyone can call themselves a project manager, for example, right? So whereas in healthcare and other industries, there is regulation around roles like dietitian.
Like you can't call yourself a nurse, you can't call yourself a doctor, you can't call yourself a dietitian.
Yeah.
Unless you've passed a regulation like exam and you're part of like a college or that kind of thing. So
right. So maybe dive into like the dietitian piece, because I think there is always that like contrast between, dietitians, nutritionists, and all that other stuff.
All the other titles out there. Yeah. So I think I've probably spoken about it before, but the process of becoming a dietitian, at least in Canada, specifically in Ontario, so you need an accredited undergraduate degree. So especially as someone who had a previous degree, it didn't count towards getting me straight into a master's program. I had to actually go back and do a proper nutrition undergraduate in order to work towards becoming a dietitian. And then the next step from there is to do, again, either an accredited master's program with an internship built into it, or you can do a diploma program, or you could also just find a way to do the practicum internship hours on their own. And then after doing all of that, the next step, which I just did, was writing the CDRE, so the Canadian Dietetic Registration Exam. So right now, I graduated in December. I applied to the College of Dietitians of Ontario and was able to get a temporary license so that I can work as a dietitian. However, it kind of hinges on the fact that I do need to pass this exam to officially become a registered dietitian. Yeah, so that's kind of a very high overview of the process of becoming a dietitian. The other difference that I'll talk about as well is, so the College of Dietitians of Ontario, and each province usually has their own college, is actually, mandated under the Regulated Health Professions Act, as well as the Dietetics Act, both of which have been in place since the 90s. And the college is in place to regulate the profession of dietitians with the interest of the public and protection in mind. So even if you think about, doctors or nurses, it's usually just the easiest one to compare to. If something were to go wrong with your treatment or, the interventions that were put in place, technically the college is there so that you can file a complaint or a report against that care provider so that you're taken care of. So that if something goes wrong for you and you have excessive medical bills or all these things, you're protected as the public because we're required to act with a certain level of ethics and integrity under the college. Anyone practicing in Ontario as a registered dietitian has to be registered with the college. They have to have passed this exam. And like I said, they kind of set and enforce standards, qualification, continuing competence. We have to do continuing education every year to keep up with what's, new and out there.
Every year?
Every year. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So every year we have to write, there's a jurisprudence exam. It just kind of goes over to remind you of the basic standards and ethics that we have in place, so they're always fresh in your head. And every year, it's usually around Halloween, I think, actually, we have to go into the system with the college and set out what's our goal for the year in terms of learning. Wow. What are we going to work towards? Are we going to do a major project? Are we going to do courses? It could be through your work, it could not be through your work. So,
and does it is there, so you have to do a certain number of continuing education credits?
Yeah, or maybe it might even be a certain number of hours towards something.
Right.
Yeah, I'll be able to figure that out this year. Now that I've done my exam, I'll have to start doing that.
Sorry, that's
every October.
That's just Ontario that has this type of requirement.
I think it's every province.
So do you have to write the exam in every province?
If you were going to practice in other provinces, you would have to write their exam.
Oh, wow.
So if I wanted to take on clients virtually, but they lived in BC, for example, I would need to write the British Columbia Dietetic Registration Exam.
Oh, wow.
In order to take on those clients.
Wow. Okay.
Same thing in the States. If I wanted to take on clients from the States, I'd have to write the US registration exam. The other one that we frequently hear of being a dietitian is Dietitians of Canada. Instead of a college, this is just an association that dietitians can be a part of. So Dietitians of Canada focuses primarily on advocacy, professional practice, leadership development. So they're kind of the ones who will help you get some of those continuing education things done. And it's also a really great resource to help you stay connected with different dietitians in your area. There's different networks you can be a part of. So for example, I'm part of a private practice dietitians network so that we can all talk about what are you doing, here's how things work in Ontario, for example. I was part of a sport nutrition network as well, so they'll update you with upcoming webinars specific to sport nutrition. So it's a really great resource to be a part of. They've been around for 80 years or something, I think, which is kind of a fun fact. But yeah, their primary purpose is just to keep dietitians connected, supported, and increase awareness of our role and our value as dietitians. So
yeah, that's crazy. Wow.
Yeah. So it's a lot, but it's important to be part of a regulated profession as a dietitian, especially someone who is able to practice in healthcare and in hospitals with people who have medical conditions and who are very ill. But I think we'll talk more about kind of the advantages of being regulated versus not the future.
Yeah. So I guess it's so interesting hearing you talk about this because part of me is just like, man, I wish change management had this type of structure. Now they're like change, and I guess I'll give a little bit of an overview of like, you know, my perceptions of it and what I know. Now it's not, like I said earlier, like change management is not regulated. Neither is project management. Now change management and project management are so connected, and I guess maybe it's worth talking about, you know, why or what's the difference between the two, because that is a common question. The way that people usually describe it is like change management is the people side of the change, you know, so we deal with, you know, the actual adoption, utilization of things. You know, how do we get somebody to change their behavior from what they're doing today to what they need to be doing tomorrow, right? The project manager is really the technical side of the change. So change management, the people side, project management, the technical side. The way that I like to frame it is like, I think the simplest, it's really just project managers get the new thing in, you know, they put the new thing in, whether it's new software, new process, new whatever. Change managers actually bring people to that new thing and get them to use it.
Oh,
right?
Okay. Yep.
So from a way to regulate something, I feel like it's a little bit easier to kind of regulate, you know, or create standards around project management, because you're really just dealing with like executing a thing, a product, you know, whether it's, like I said, process, could be a new, for example, a new system, a new ERP system, enterprise resource planning system for a company. You can just implement that. How do you do that? You follow a certain framework. It's, you know, it's very complicated, but it's not necessarily complex in a systems thinking standpoint, right? Whereas change management, it varies so much. There's so many variables at play that following a certain standard actually may impede your ability to manage that change successfully, because you need to be adaptable. You need to be able to gather feedback, change on the fly. Like, how are people responding to this technique? Not well. Okay, we need to change it. And so adherence too rigidly to a framework is actually detrimental, in my opinion.
Right.
Which I think makes structuring a standard for change management really difficult,
Yeah,
right?
True.
But I can't help but like think about, you know, your dietitian sort of framework and be like, wow, like that would be so cool to have. And there are elements of that in change management. So, I mean, anyone can call themselves a change manager, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you get hired to be like a change manager at a company now, like on day 2, it's like, I'm a change manager now. And that literally is it, right? So what differentiates me from like that day 2 change manager? Nothing really. Like, we both can call ourselves change managers, right? I have more experience, you know, but at the end of the day, there's no stopping that person from calling themselves a change manager. So it's like, so that is the difficulty, because there really is no way to kind of gauge that just on paper. Like, who can't, like, so for example, like if there was that, like, hey, you need to have at least 5 years experience, you need to have written this exam in order to call yourself a change manager, right? Then
you would know they're all coming in with like the same level of,
Yeah, so there is that element. And I will say, you know, with a lot of roles that are, you know, common in business, like change management is a great example, communications or any roles in like training and stuff, there is that lack of like credibility and trust because you don't have, you know, a standard that everyone expects you to pass before you get the role. And so you do have a lot of variability in skill, you know, so you and that hurts the industry, right? Because if you have a company who had a really terrible change manager, you know, work with them in the past, and now I'm coming in to be like, hey, you guys need a change manager? Like, no.
Yeah.
We've tried that before.
Try it again.
Yeah, we've done this whole change management thing. Didn't work for us. Like, see you later. So it does hurt the industry, right? Not having that kind of quote unquote regulation or standard. And I know that, you know, there are associations that are out there that are trying to kind of rectify it as much as they can. So for project managers, I think it's a little bit more common, just because project management is a little bit older, a lot older than change management is in the business setting. relatively new. With project manager, you have the PMP, so project management professional designation, which is worldwide, global, and I would say is the gold standard of project managers. If you have that, you are a project manager, and it has the element of educational requirements, experience, and a final exam based off of the project management book of knowledge.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
Book of knowledge.
Book of knowledge,
Project management book of knowledge.
The issue with change management is, for one, there are multiple standards out there.
Right.
And that makes it difficult because then you're like, which one do I pick, right? Yeah. And the other difficulty, as I mentioned, is just the field of change management. It makes it difficult to draft a standard for, because the framework needs to be flexible and you can't necessarily just be rigid when it comes to change. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to be agile, mm-hmm. And so that element needs to be present for you to be successful. And that's my opinion, just based on my experience with managing change. Like, frameworks is a great way. Like, following a framework rigidly.
That's a fun word.
That's a really hard word to say. Luckily, being able to pronounce words has no bearing on whether you're a good change manager or not.
Your competency as a change manager.
But I think if there is a relationship there to say, the more rigid you are in following a framework, the more likely it is that your change will fail, mm-hmm. because you're just ignoring the external factors, right? But the Association of Change Management Professionals, which I think is probably the most popular, is they have a standard that they follow and a designation that you can apply for and get, which is a Certified Change Management Professional designation of the CCMP. And that is very similar to the project management side of things, where there is an education requirement, like 3 to 5 years, I believe. There is 3 to 5 years of experience as a change manager. There is a training element, so you do need to complete like change management education. So that would be, for example, like the ProSci education is part of that. People think the ProSci is like a standard. It kind of is, but it's like not really. It's more of like a framework, in my opinion. Yeah, it's more like a framework. Change management is like, this change management standard incorporates like frameworks, but
like ProSci.
But
it could be other things.
I wouldn't call ProSci like a standard necessarily.
Right.
I'm a very big advocate of ProSci. I think it's one of the best frameworks out there. Do I follow it prescriptively? No, because I don't follow anything prescriptively. That's why I'm good at my job.
You got to adapt to your people.
And then there's an exam. So you got education, you've got training, you have a final exam, and then you also have the element of, like you were mentioning, continuing education.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So there's a recertified period every 3 years. There's also another one, I think it's called Change Management Institute, the CMI. I don't know if I would say that it's the same kind of concept, I believe. It's not as rigid as the CCMP. Like, I think I don't think there's an exam, but I think there's like an interview, and like you have to submit like a written application and stuff with like experience and stuff. So I don't think there's an exam for that one. I don't quote me, but so there are these two standards, and there is also a book of knowledge for the CCMP at least. And I know there is a book or a standard for the CMI. So it's just, that makes it difficult too, right? Because you've got these two standards. You're like, which one do I get? Right? Like, what if like my employer wants me to be a certified versus the CMI one, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, do I put all my eggs in the basket of the CCMP? But what if somebody's asking for the CMI? How do they know it's the same? Mm-hmm. So I think having the two makes it difficult.
More complicated, yeah.
If we had one like project management, I feel like that would be easier. Now, saying all this, I am actually a member of the ACMP. Yep. I'm not certified. I have thought about becoming certified, because if an employer is looking for that and prefers somebody to have the standard for all of the reasons you kind of mentioned and we'll talk about, then I'm like, I don't want that to be the reason why they don't hire me. So it has crossed my mind.
Nobody's really asked you for those specific designations yet. So it's also like, why spend the time and the money doing something that you're not sure A, you'll ever be asked for, or B, you might get asked for the opposite one, and then you're like, oh great,
right.
I need to do the other one now. Like,
yeah, and it's just like, and at the end of the day, I have not read the standards, but from what I've heard from other change managers, it's they advocate a certain framework, to follow. And for my approach to change, I'm very fluid in my framework. I like to take pieces of other frameworks and say like, oh yeah, like I really like the ADKAR model from ProSci, build awareness, make sure that you establish that desire for change, build that knowledge, ADKA ability. So I'm like,
we're all getting a crash course.
I'm like,
right now.
Man, I need to like write this down. Yeah, like build the ability up to make sure that they can actually be proficient on day one, and then reinforcement. So that's the ADKAR model, and I really like that. I think that actually does make sense, and I do align with a lot of the teachings from ProSci. I do also align with a lot of the teaching from Lean, Lean change management, which I think is, just the way that it needs to be. You need to be agile. You need to be thinking about like, what if things change on the fly, which they always do? How are you going to adapt to that? Right. So, I have my own kind of structure and standard. So if I was like forced to follow something else, I'm not sure I'd be able to do that. And here lies the challenge that I think the change management industry has. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
All right. So maybe let's dive into kind of the importance of it.
Yeah, so importance
of regulation, right?
I think I mentioned at the beginning already, like one of the first biggest ones of being a regulated professional is that protection of the public. So, like I said, if something were to go wrong with your treatment or the interventions you were using, you are protected as, the client or the patient, because there is a way for you to report, misconduct or just inadequate care. And that professional will obviously have consequences if they're not following a certain way of doing things. So kind of like you were saying as well, like we do have, our nutrition care process. There's a specific guideline on how to conduct a nutrition assessment, how to do follow-ups, how to determine a nutrition diagnosis, and what general interventions are usually used for what kind of medical condition you have. There's obviously flexibility just in how you provide patient care, but I do think for the most part, it's a pretty set standard of how we should be acting as professionals. And I think it's also a little bit easier because most of the time, if you have diabetes, for example, you're going to be following the same kind of diabetes diet as most other people with diabetes would be following. So there's not a whole lot of need for that like flexibility, like you said, or needing to change from like person to person. For the most part, most conditions will have, positive outcomes with specific interventions.
Right.
I think on that part too, even protection of the public, I think it goes the other way, and it does help protect the provider too. Specifically through Dietitians of Canada, there is an option to get liability insurance when you sign up every year. So that's something that I have, and something that's usually required if you're going to work as a dietitian in, anywhere but private practice, essentially. And if you're in private practice, you should be getting that for yourself no matter what, just to be safe.
Yeah.
But that way it provides you with some coverage if something were to go wrong and you were getting sued or something, for example. So I do think being regulated helps protect both parties with the interactions, and especially as a dietitian where we're more focused and we're the only, regulated health professionals to be able to deal with medical nutrition requirements, then that's a big one.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, for sure. I mean, we're talking about the comparisons between our industries. You're actually saving lives. Mine is not at all. Saving money. That's basically all I'm doing.
Helping people come to the right change.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are, it's like if you were to be tested on, it would be like if as part of like being a dietitian, you would be tested or like held to account for your patients following your direction.
Right.
Yeah. That's exactly what my role is, right? Like my element is like, and that's the challenging part. Like you can give the advice to your patient to like, you need to follow this, and this, here's your plan. You can have your weekly chats, monthly chats, whatever it is. But like when you're not around, will they actually do what you tell them to do?
Right.
And that part is where I struggle with, the whole change management industry and like regulating that. Cause like we only focus on that part, like getting people to do things differently, which like, God, I can't even change manage myself. Like,
I know. Yeah. It's hard.
How could I be regulated or expected to, change everybody and guarantee that, like, yeah, you hire me 100%, everyone's going to adapt to this change. It's impossible, right? And that's I think where lies the challenge for us.
And I think for the way we get around that as any healthcare professional, I think is with like really good documentation. So whenever we're doing our chart notes, it's important for us to go through to say, during my assessment with the patient, like, what was our conversation? What did I tell them? Did they, nod? Did they actually communicate that they agreed what we were doing? Were they okay with the plan? Did they want to do something different? Like being very specific about even like how you talk to them.
Yeah.
And then at the end, like documenting that, like, I gave them these handouts. We agreed to like this specific plan. Here's what they're going to go do. Here's what I'm going to do to follow up in however long. So it's all written down for us. So
yeah,
that way, if, the patient decides not to follow our advice or what we're recommending to them, and they come back to us a few months later and they're like, it's not working. Like, you're not helping me, blah, blah, blah. You can be like, well, here's what we had, here's our conversations over the last couple months, and you agreed to try and do this, but it seems like you're not.
Yeah.
So then you kind of get around it that way. But
yeah, that makes sense.
I think for large scale change management, that's so hard. Like, you guys don't do like charting or documentation on.
Yeah, but we should. That's the issue.
Maybe that's the thing.
I think there is this element of like, we can, I think with everything, I feel like a broken record all the time, but with everything, I think the solution is always in a balanced solution.
Right.
Like, I think going one way, like to have like zero regulation is a mistake. To have too much regulation is also a mistake, right? Because that will inhibit innovation and all of that kind of stuff. But on the other side, if you don't have regulation, then that's where you can potentially affect the credibility and the trust of everyone that follows. I'm part of, like I said, the ACMP group, mainly because, and that's just to participate in the forums and have conversations and stuff. And I actually actively participate in them because, I think we're all in it together. If there's a change manager in, a company that is failing and not doing well, then that's going to affect my pipeline for business, right? Because now that business leader is going to have, a bad taste in their mouth about how effective change management is. And I think we're so new that it is important for us to share our opinions. And I think the reason why we've got these multiple standards and no real clarity around like what role does a change manager have to play in an organization, that's the stuff that I think we need to fix. So project managers, for example, they're not regulated, but in a business setting, they are audited.
Right.
Change managers are not, right? Because project managers, they have a set number of like artifacts that they need to have, right? They need to have, a risk log. They need to have like a project plan. They need to have, all these other things, a RAID log, all this stuff. And they're audited to that to make sure that they actually tracked all the activities, they managed their logs appropriately, all of that kind of stuff. Change managers, it's just kind of like, you go from one change manager to the next. I guarantee you they're going to tell you different things that they do for every change. Right? Because I have my set of artifacts that I provide to clients. And these are the things that I believe as a change manager you need to have available. Things like, obviously, the change management plan around like, well, what are you going to do? And that incorporates communications, it incorporates things like training, all of that type of stuff. The change plan is like the umbrella. But I also have a change impact assessment, which is looking at what are you doing today and what are you going to be doing tomorrow, and what is the impact of the change and how are we going to mitigate that impact. Those are key important elements. And there's several others that I pull together for every change, but who asked for it? Nobody.
I know,
right?
It's just something
Nobody
you're like
gets
proactively
audited,
doing,
right?
Yeah.
So does every change have an impact assessment? No, actually, I've seen it. Like they don't require it because no one's checking it. So I think those elements, there needs to be like a standard around what are the elements that are required and what information is necessary and what's the input required and what's the intended outcome, of those things. so that you can get to the point of what you were talking about, like the idea of like documentation and charting, like replicating that within managing change, because there needs to be some type of standard to it, but then it's a very foundational, and then you build up from there.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And I think that's the important piece, and I think that's what we're missing. And maybe, the CCMP solves that, but the issue is you have these multiple standards. Like, we can't have two, right?
No, it's just so confusing.
And then there's also that controversy, I guess, around like ProSci. Is that like a standard frame? Like it kind of is a little bit of both, as I'm like kind of second guessing myself, because now I'm thinking back to the training, and I'm like, they did kind of have a very like regimented schedule around like phase 1, 2, 3. What are the deliverables for each? So maybe it is actually, more of a standard. So let's say 2.5, standards that are out there.
That's a lot, yeah.
So which one do you pick, right? And which artifacts do you use, and which ones don't you have to use, right? And then, of course, you've got the employer that potentially has their own standard,
right,
for
of what
managing
they want
change,
in a
right?
change manager.
Which may be ProSci related, it may be ACMP, who knows, And so there's so much ability, and I think I don't think we'll ever get to like a standard like you see with project management, just because of my point of, project management is dealing with the technical side. We're dealing with the people side. It makes it a little bit more complex and difficult. And, I think there does need to be some structure, definitely more than there is today.
Yeah.
But I would hate to see it get to a point where it's so structured that we are impeded on our ability to be flexible
and to provide
adapt.
Like effective change management.
Because that's the thing. It's like constant feedback, constant change and iteration. That's the only way that you'll be successful managing a change. And it's so hard to get the buy-in right now to do stuff like that, because it takes a lot of resources. Change management is still one of the lowest funded, part of a project. And so that makes it really difficult for us to have the bandwidth in order to do all these things, not just one time. A project is 8 months, let's say. A lot of this stuff we get bandwidth to do right at the beginning. I'm like, we need to be doing this stuff every month, checking in, making sure, have these change? Have we learned more information about the change now that we've moved closer to execution? We need to constantly go back and redo some of these things to make sure that when we get to launching, we are aware of what those impacts are, and we've mitigated as many as we can. Because once you launch, there's going to be a slew of other changes and impacts that we didn't even know about, right? And so you got to be prepared for that. It's I'm sweating just talking about it. But because of the complexity, I think there needs to be some type of standard that we all need to follow. Like, what are those artifacts that we need to do, that we need to have in place and deliver to clients or deliver to our employer? And I think there needs to be something that we can follow, just to make it easier for us to know that we're doing a good job too. Right? A lot of change managers just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. They're like, no one's really telling me what to do, so I'm just gonna. HBR said we should do a change impact assessment, so I guess we'll do that. And I think we need to remove some of the blind spots a bit.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going to say, even like tying it back into the importance of having, professional governance. I think if you were to have more governance over change managers, like I had said with that first point of protecting the public, I think in your instance, it's about protecting the companies. Yeah. From changes going really wrong, right?
Indirectly affects, the public. If we're talking private or public companies, we've got shareholders, or pension fund owners, a majority, like a lot of people, so technically we are affecting people's livelihood through money.
And then on the flip side, it's protecting you as the professional as well, right? So it's the same as dietitians. Like, you're protecting your client, yes, but you're also protecting yourself from bad change management happening, and now you suddenly can't find as much work, or like you said, you're getting the least amount of funding. Like,
right. Or them coming to me to say like, oh, why didn't you do this, this, and this? It's like, well, no, like, this is what I was required to do. here's what I've done and here's how I've gone above and beyond what that standard is, right? Like, so.
But not many other change managers are probably doing all that amount of work to cover their own butts, right?
And the other thing is when I go above and beyond, they're just like, all right, I guess that's normal what change managers do. It's like, no, it's not. You have no idea.
Yeah.
So, it is just important. And I think change managers, honestly, like, I love you all, because I think it's industry to be a part of, because we are in the beginning, of it still. And there's a lot of people that don't get it. There's a lot of people that are like, we don't need it. We got a project manager. That's fine. And, you do need a project manager, but you also need a change manager. You can't have, in a small project, sure, like a project manager and a change manager can be the same person. Fine. Like, yeah, it's okay. But you're dealing about two very different elements here. You're talking about the technical side and the people side. You're expecting one person to know and be an expert in both of those areas. Come on, that's not feasible. Those are two very different skill sets, Yeah.
And I think that's where we like run into issues as well, even with nutritionists, because that's not a protected title. It's not a regulated profession. It's kind of similar where, like, I know a lot of nutritionists have, the best intents, and there is room for them, because I do think a lot of people could benefit from getting provided with like adequate nutrition, care from somebody who actually has like studied it more and like knows a little bit more than them, because a lot of people don't know anything, right? Which is fair. It's a lot of information to sift through yourself.
Absolutely.
But then you run into that issue of like, if it's your trainer at the gym, like technically their area of expertise is in exercise science. Yeah,
it's important to like pick that lane, right? And you saw it in psychology too a lot, right? Like, I mean, the idea of, back in the day, only psychologists were the ones who were taking on patients to support like therapy and stuff like that. And now, you have social workers being able to do that, and folks with master's degree not requiring a PhD, like just to, be able to provide that level of support and meet the demand that's out there, right?
And that's the thing, right? Like, there is such a high demand, and yet I just worry for, I was even thinking about this the other day about how even with nutritionists providing, nutrition information to quote unquote healthy people, a lot of the time it's still very detrimental or very risky, because without the proper education and understanding of people and human behavior and the science behind things, like, unfortunately, from what I've seen, a lot of nutritionists are pushing very like restrictive diets or like quote unquote healthy or clean eating, that in itself can be a risk for developing like disordered eating behaviors, or it can just harm your health in so many ways that I don't think they fully understand. When you're fully cutting out food groups or fully cutting out certain kinds of food because you're like, sugar's bad, like, period. So I'm not even going to have carrots because they have sugar in it. It's just, it goes down a rabbit hole when you have someone who isn't a regulated professional who really understands how complicated, and like you've said many times, how complex human behavior is. Like, it's not so easy to just be like, cut out everything with sugar and you'll lose weight. Like, that won't work for everybody, and that's actually very dangerous to just recommend to everybody.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating like area to talk about, because I think it's such a bipartisan type of like topic where you do have people on like one side or the other. It's really funny. I was having this conversation last week, 2 weeks ago, just around like the culture around change management too, where it's like there are, those people who are like CCMP, like that's the way to go, like
die hard, that's it.
ProSci, I think, is like probably one of the worst out there, just around like the culture around it. Like, it's like ProSci or nothing, but, and it's, I will say, like, when I took ProSci, I'm like, this is great. Like, this is like what I've been looking for, sort of thing. And I feel like people definitely had that same feeling, but it's just like now it's kind of culty,
right? They take it a little too far.
And lean change management is similar, and it's just so funny because it's like you've got like these, it's like religion, almost, where it's like they're fighting, back in the day, like the Crusades. It's like that now with change management. It's like if you're not CCMP, you can't call yourself a change manager. Well, if you don't follow ProSci, then your change is gonna fail. It's just like it's like, guys, let's like work together. Let's
step back and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah,
and like work together to actually make a good change manager.
I think my final like thoughts overall is that I do think there needs to be some type of standard, whether it's put in place at a company level, I don't know. I think it needs to be broader than that. As a change management professional, you have to understand, like, we are dealing with people's lives here. We are dealing with people's work lives, and we're dealing with massive changes. People moving from like being acquired by a company, moving into another company, how managing that change to make sure that they feel secure and psychologically safe throughout that transition. Like, it's a very anxiety producing change, is very anxiety producing. And in the context of work, where you're dealing with like benefit changes and salary changes, like, this requires a certain level of professionalism and skill set in order to manage that change properly, and following without having some type of standard to follow, just foundationally, just to say, like, this is what successful change looks like. This is what a change manager must provide to a client. It's really difficult for the change manager to, know what he or she needs to do, or they need to do.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important, but there is an element of balance that I think we need to strive for, because there are tons of frameworks out there, and there's a lot of value in a lot of them. And I think I know we do need to pull out elements from all of the different frameworks, like Cotter's framework, I just said ProSize framework. I haven't read the standard, but for CCMP, but I'm sure there's gold in there too. We need to take elements from lean change management. Of course, I'm a big fan of those. I think I like all elements, and I pull from all of them in the way that I manage change, because there's a lot of really good things in there. And we need to be able to still do that, because I think the secret, at the end of the day, they built these frameworks because they worked,
Right.
Like, they tried it and they're like, wow, this works. Let's post about it.
And fine tune it. And then, yeah.
And they're like, wow, this worked again. Wow. Okay. This is continuing to work. And then they decided, hey, let's write a framework around this strategy, right? Like so it has worked, right? And so, is it going to work today in the environment that you're in? Maybe not. And so you need to take elements where it makes sense, given the change that you're with. But there's gold in all of them, you know? So we need to find that right balance.
If I could, I guess, wrap up my final thoughts. Obviously, I'm an advocate for regulated health professions. Otherwise, I would have chosen to become just not just a nutritionist, but I would have chosen to become a nutritionist over a dietitian. It would have been a lot easier. But I mean, with nutritionists, they run into the same problem that it seems like change managers are having, where there's so many different courses or so many different things you could do to become a nutritionist and actually have something to back up your claims. But it's like, which one do you choose? Which one is better? Which one will work for, the most people? It's very hard to decide. So obviously I'm a big advocate of, being part of a regulated health professional to make sure that we're doing it the right way, and to really just highlight, the importance. I think the top 3 things to consider are just the protection of the public, protection of the profession, fostering trust between yourself and your client as well is a big one. And then, like you've hinted at plenty of times, ensuring that quality and that compliance and that competence that you have when you know that you're going to work with, a regulated professional.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, completely agree. So I think that's it. I think we had a really good chat.
Yeah.
I think we could probably talk about this for forever. It's such an interesting topic. And, as things progress in both of our industries, mine probably more so,
yeah.
Who knows, maybe somebody in one of the standards will listen to this podcast and, we'll make some progress to find like that one standard for all of us to follow.
Everyone to follow.
That would make my life a lot easier, to be honest, just to know, that we're on the right track, and, so yeah, this is a great topic, one that I've definitely always wanted to talk about, because having seen you in the regulated industry of dietitians, I'm like, this would be interesting to apply, at the change management level.
For sure.
This is great.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for listening today. Sorry we weren't around last week, but, hopefully we'll get caught up, and we'll be right back with you every Monday moving forward. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to us on social media or through email. We would love to hear from you, especially about any topics that you'd like to hear more about coming up. We could definitely use a few ideas, because I'm sure we'll run through quite a few this week. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Reroute Reflections, or on X at Reroute Podcast. And as always, if you haven't already, please subscribe via whatever platform you're listening to, and share it with a friend.
Thanks for listening, everybody. It was great chatting with you again. And remember, don't be afraid to reroute.
Bye.
Bye.